It's strange, isn't it? How life can feel so ordinary one moment, and then, in a blink, everything changes. My name's Katie, and I never thought I'd be here, writing a post like this. But here I am, and I can't stop thinking about the events that led up to this point. Maybe by sharing this, I'll make sense of it, or maybe just find some kind of peace. Either way, it feels like I have to get it out. So to set the scene, I grew up in a family where everyone had their roles. My dad, he was in the military, always away for long stretches. It was just me and my sister Amy most of the time. She's 2 years younger than me, and we had this weird mix of closeness and distance. I wasn't really sure how to feel about her. She's always been this high-maintenance, kind of entitled person, and I guess I never fully clicked with her. Maybe it's because I've always had to be the independent one. Even as a kid, I was the one who didn't need constant attention. Amy, on the other hand, seemed to expect it. Dad remarried when I was 18. It was quick, and I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. But I was older, so I didn't say much. That's when things started to change around here. His new wife Linda and her kids. Things got a little crowded. At first I figured it would just be another awkward phase, but it never felt quite right. Linda was nice enough, but it's one of those situations where you never quite know where you stand. And her kids, don't even get me started. There's something about them, this unspoken thing that makes me uncomfortable. Maybe it's the way they look at me, or maybe it's the way they expect things to just fall into place because they're part of the family now. Anyway, for a while, things seemed calm. I finished school, started my business, and built my life. I kept my distance from the chaos of family life and made peace with the fact that I wasn't going to be one of those people who had a picture-perfect, tight-knit family. But it's funny how things have a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. It started with the smallest things. My dad asking me to come over for dinner. He used to be so hands-off, so distant, but all of a sudden, he wanted me around more. I didn't get it at first. I figured maybe he just wanted some company. So I'd stop by now and then, but with every visit, I felt more and more out of place. It wasn't the home I remembered. The vibe was different, strained even. There were too many people, too many opinions, too many expectations. And then there was that day. The day I knew something had shifted. Amy called me asking for a favor. She was in a bind. I didn't know what kind of bind, but she said it was important. She needed me to babysit her kids. I've never been close to her kids. In fact, I've always found them a bit overwhelming, so I told her I wasn't up for it. She didn't take it well. In fact, she snapped at me, and I could feel the tension through the phone line. It was weird the way she got so upset over something so small. That's when I started to realize that I'd been drifting from my family for a reason. There were cracks in the foundation, things I hadn't noticed before, things that now seemed glaringly obvious. My refusal to babysit her kids was just the tip of the iceberg, but I didn't know what was coming next. I had no idea how much things were about to spiral. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if I saw it all coming, if I knew deep down that something was brewing. But I ignored it. I thought I could just go on with my life, do my thing, and let them do theirs. And maybe, just maybe, that's where I went wrong. After that phone call, things between Amy and me were tense, to say the least. I didn't think much of it at first. People fight, right? It's normal. So I figured it'd blow over. But then came the first time my dad asked me to visit after the argument. He seemed to think everything was fine, like we could just sweep it under the rug. But when I walked through the door that night, I could tell it wasn't. The house felt off, quiet in a way that wasn't comforting, but suffocating. I could hear Linda talking in the kitchen, but it was muffled, like she was trying to keep the noise in check. Amy wasn't there yet. I sat down at the dining table, staring at the empty chairs, the place settings that seemed a little too perfect, like they were meant to make everything look like it was all normal, even though I could feel the cracks. When Amy finally walked in, her eyes immediately locked onto mine. She was holding her youngest, and there was something about her expression, like she was trying to hide something. Her smile was tight, too controlled. It wasn't like her. I mean, Amy's always been dramatic, but this felt different. It was like she was holding her breath, waiting for something to explode. It was awkward, to say the least. Dad tried to fill the silence with small talk, but even he seemed to notice it wasn't going well. Then, after dinner, as we sat around in the living room, it happened. Amy turned to me, her tone colder than I've ever heard it. "Why didn't you help me?" she asked, her voice low but biting. I didn't need her to elaborate. I knew exactly what she meant. "Amy, I told you I wasn't available," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have my own life to manage." Her face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, frustration, disappointment. "You never help. It's like you don't care about the family anymore." That hurt. It was a blow I didn't expect, but one I felt in my chest all the same. I didn't respond at first. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't escalate it further. But the tension in the room was palpable. Dad was sitting there, clearly uncomfortable, not knowing whether to intervene or just pretend like everything was fine. It wasn't fine, though, and Amy knew it. And then, just like that, Linda stepped in. She tried to diffuse things, to pretend like it was all just a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. I could see it in her eyes. She was siding with Amy, whether intentionally or not. Maybe it was because Amy was her stepdaughter, and maybe it was because I was the odd one out. I don't know, but I could feel it. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I left that night feeling more alone than I had in a long time. It was like I didn't belong to any of it. The family dinners, the forced smiles, the "let's pretend everything's okay" moments. I wasn't sure what hurt more. The fact that Amy and I were drifting further apart, or that my dad, who I thought I could count on, didn't even seem to notice. But that was just the beginning. A few weeks passed and I tried to move on. I figured maybe it was just a rough patch. After all, I had my business to focus on, and there were other things to worry about. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One evening, just after closing up shop, I got a message from my dad. He asked if I could stop by the house the next day. No big deal, right? It was normal for him to want to chat. But when I got there, I noticed something was off. Dad looked different, tired maybe, or distracted. It wasn't like him. We sat down in the living room and he looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Katie, there's something you need to know," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I was already bracing myself. Whenever he said something like that, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. "It's about Amy," he continued. "She's been going through some stuff lately. I think she's hiding it from you." My stomach dropped. Of course she was. Amy always hid things, emotions, problems, anything she didn't want to deal with. She liked to keep up appearances, to act like everything was fine even when it wasn't. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "If she's struggling, why hasn't she talked to me about it?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know. I think she's ashamed. But it's more than that. I think she's been feeling neglected, not just by you, but by me too. I've been so caught up in my own world I didn't notice how much she needed me." I could feel the weight of his words, but something else was nagging at me. Why now? Why was he telling me this all of a sudden? "Dad, what aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, his eyes shifting away. "Katie, I think Linda might be involved. I've been hearing things, small things. It's nothing concrete, but I'm worried." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Linda. What was he trying to say? "Dad, what are you trying to say?" My voice was shaking now, the calm facade I'd been holding up starting to crack. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was barely a whisper. "I don't trust her, Katie. I think she's been manipulating Amy." It was as if the ground shifted beneath me. All the questions I'd had about my stepmother, the strange feeling I got whenever she was around, the way she'd always seemed to insert herself into things, started to make sense. But this was bigger than I ever imagined. The next few days were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't get what Dad had said out of my head. Was it true? Could Linda really be manipulating Amy, or was my dad just projecting his own insecurities onto her? I decided to find out for myself. It was a Friday night when I made my move. Amy had been quiet lately, and I knew she was still upset with me. But I figured if I could catch her alone, maybe, just maybe, I could get her to open up. I drove over to the house, nerves twisting in my stomach. When I walked in, I immediately knew something was wrong. Amy was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red, her face pale. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time in weeks, there was no anger or resentment in her eyes, just exhaustion. "I don't know what to do anymore, Katie," she whispered, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm losing everything." I sat down beside her, my heart aching. This wasn't the sister I knew. This wasn't the person who used to make everything feel like it would be okay, no matter how bad things got. "Talk to me," I said, my voice gentle. "What's going on? Why didn't you tell me?" Amy shook her head, her hands trembling. "It's not just you, Katie. It's everything. Mom, Linda, she's been pushing me to do things I don't want to do. She's been telling me I'm not good enough. And Dad, he doesn't see it. He doesn't understand." The pieces started to fall into place. Amy had been struggling, but it wasn't just about me or the babysitting incident. There was so much more going on beneath the surface, things I hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. And that's when she told me everything. Linda had been manipulating her for months, feeding her doubts, making her feel small. She had been isolating Amy, making her question her own worth. "I didn't want to believe it," Amy said, tears streaming down her face. "But I think I've been brainwashed, Katie, and I don't know how to get out of it." The revelation hit me like a slap in the face. I had been so focused on my own life, on keeping my distance, that I didn't see what was happening to Amy. I didn't see how she was being torn apart from the inside. The fallout from all of this was a mess. I confronted Linda, and while she denied everything, I could see the guilt in her eyes. My dad, of course, felt betrayed, but he didn't want to admit it. There were arguments, long silences, and moments when I didn't know if we'd ever be a family again. But the real shift came when Amy finally broke free. She left Linda's house and moved in with me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She was raw, vulnerable, but she was also determined to take control of her life again. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the sister I remembered, the strong, capable person I'd always admired. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot. We both had our scars, our emotional baggage, but we were there for each other in a way we hadn't been in years. Slowly, we started rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was progress. Amy spent the next few months healing. She went to therapy, started reconnecting with her own sense of self, and began standing up for herself in ways I never thought possible. It was inspiring to watch her reclaim her life piece by piece. It made me realize that I hadn't been as present for her as I should have been, and that guilt hung over me for a while. But I tried to be there, really be there, for her now. Dad, on the other hand, took longer to come to terms with everything. I think he felt embarrassed, betrayed by Linda, but also guilty for not seeing the signs. He tried to make amends with Amy, but it wasn't as easy as just apologizing. Trust had been broken, and you can't fix that with a few words. He did his best, though, and over time things started to feel less tense when we were together. We weren't quite back to where we were, but the distance between us was narrowing. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were all willing to try. As for Linda, well, things didn't end well between us. She left Dad not long after the confrontation. She accused him of not being supportive enough, of not understanding her needs. But it was clear to me that she had manipulated him just as much as she had Amy. The whole thing had been a game for her, playing people against each other to get what she wanted. I think Dad finally realized that, even if he didn't want to admit it to himself right away. The whole situation left me with a lot of emotions to untangle. On one hand, I was relieved that Amy was starting to heal, that she was finding herself again. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel angry. Angry at myself for not seeing what was happening sooner, angry at Linda for her manipulation, and angry at the way everything had turned out. But then again, maybe anger was just a way to distract from the real feeling underneath. Fear. Fear that we'd never truly fix the cracks in our family. Fear that the damage was too deep, that the love we once had for each other would never fully return. And even as things slowly started to improve, that fear lingered. But as time went on, I realized something important. We don't always get to choose how our family turns out. We don't get to decide who stays and who leaves, who heals and who doesn't. What we can choose is how we respond, how we move forward, and I chose to move forward, one step at a time. Amy and I are still figuring things out. There are days when everything feels like it's back to normal, and others when the past comes rushing back, threatening to pull us under. But we've learned to lean on each other more, to be open and honest in a way we never were before, and that, in itself, feels like a victory. As for my dad, well, I think he's learning too. We've had our difficult conversations, and though we're not perfect, we're trying. Sometimes that's all you can do. In the end, I guess the hardest part wasn't the confrontation or the fallout. It was realizing that no one, least of all me, had it all figured out. But if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that family isn't just about who's blood related to you. It's about who's willing to fight for you when everything falls apart. I may not have the perfect family, and maybe we'll never get it all right. But I know this: I'll keep fighting for mine, because when you love someone, that's what you do. You fight, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Even when the people who should have your back let you down. You fight, and sometimes that's enough. Story 2. After my wife passed away, my in-laws took her possessions, sued me to get custody of my kid. I chopped them all then. Financial assistance. I'm a 45-year-old man going through a difficult time in my life after losing my wife in a terrible vehicle accident. When the collision occurred, she and our kid were traveling home. My wife died and my kid lived, although he suffered serious injuries. Following a hospital stay of 1 day. That was the most difficult time of my life. My son needed me. Therefore, I didn't have the time or space to grieve in a healthy way. That following day, he underwent significant limb surgery. We couldn't even tell him what had happened to his mother because he is just 11 years old. Even though he was only partially aware, doctors cautioned that the news may make his recuperation more difficult. He inquired about her often, so I did my best to be strong for him. The unfortunate individual was deprived of the opportunity to say goodbye to his mother. Being at the hospital with my baby while my wife's funeral was taking place was really tough for me. I had to go to my son's funeral, so I was only a guest. I let my in-laws to take responsibility of the funeral. I handed them the check to pay for the costs. I apologize for boring you all with so many specifics. I've experienced enough of this. My wife passed away. My youngster barely made it through it. Rather than being there for me at this trying time, my in-laws broke into my home and mistreated me. I quote, "am in need of a place to vent. So here I am. Please be patient with me." When I returned home after my son's operation, I discovered that my wife's jewelry and other valuables had been stolen away by my in-laws' mother-in-law and sister-in-law. That sight astounded me. How were they able to remove my wife's belongings from my home, and without me at that? I questioned them about it. They claimed to be entitled to it since it belonged to their daughter. I pressed them to return those items to me. It would pass to my daughter, who is my wife's surviving child. My daughter is 9 years old, and my son is 11. The rationale given by my in-laws was that I would remarry and offer my second wife those priceless possessions. They wouldn't believe me when I told them I didn't have that aim. I didn't take any action against them right away since my baby was still in the hospital. I awaited his recovery and eventual release. After many operations and physical treatment, it took him a month to be released from the hospital. I then proceeded to talk about the situation with my lawyer. He requested that I conduct a thorough search of the house and make a list of everything that was gone. The whole jewelry box that belonged to my wife was gone. It contained the family artifacts she received from her grandma, as well as her jewels. The records pertaining to the trust money, however, which she inherited from her uncle, were the most valuable. My wife worked as a nurse and had a good relationship with her uncle. She provided excellent care for him on his deathbed when he became disabled. He left my wife his trust fund in his will. Her granny was no different. My wife visited her frequently, checked on her grandmother's health, and provided nursing care in her last days. Thus, the family's heritage jewelry was given to her by her grandmother. After I provided my lawyer with the information, he sent my in-laws a formal notice of demand. They wouldn't return my wife's belongings to me. The way their hues shifted astounded me. My in-laws and I always got along well. My wife had a close relationship with her mother, and I treated her with the same regard. In addition, my sister-in-law showed my wife a lot of affection. The youngest sibling was my bride. How they had abruptly altered after her passing is beyond me. When my lawyer demanded notice, my in-laws contested the demand, arguing that my wife's family artifacts should remain with them rather than me. Hearing dates for the lawsuit have not yet been announced. My attorney has promised to return my wife's property to me. I adore my wife. Seeing her own relatives inflict suffering on us breaks my heart. I sincerely hope her possessions return to us so my kids may inherit them. I'm not sure how excellent my odds are. My pals don't believe this. They claim that my in-laws are right, that I may get married again and offer my new wife my wife's possessions. I quote, "Mem, not sure if the court took it into account when rendering its decision. How are they able to presume something that hasn't been done yet? I'm in a pretty pitiful frame of mind right now. The loss of my devoted wife is already very hard for me to accept. A legal battle is even more stressful to fight right now. In addition to all of them, both of my young children lost their mothers. They have a really hard time moving on. I do my best to be a good father, but I will never be able to equal my wife's love and compassion. I'm hoping that this experience will make me stronger." One update: being a single father is not easy. It is really challenging to balance my job and my responsibilities as a father while my son is in the hospital. Even when my kid recovered, I was totally away from work, but I'm grateful that my business partner and senior staff were able to manage the ship without me. It has been challenging. It goes beyond the duties around the house. I'm more needed than ever by the kids. In order for them to get over the loss, I had to provide them with adequate emotional support. My son found it especially hard to accept the fact that he was not even able to attend his mother's burial. He also holds himself responsible for the mishap. He said that by talking too much, he diverted his mother's attention from driving. To assist them get over this emotional loss, I'm taking them to therapy. Despite my demand notice, my in-laws chose to go to court rather than surrender my wife's asset. My mother-in-law told me over the phone that she doesn't mean any harm to me. Her only concern is that her daughter's belongings don't end up in the wrong hands. When my wife wasn't around, I asked her who should be the rightful owner of those items. She named my sister-in-law instead of my children, which surprised me. In my wife's absence, how in the world is my sister-in-law the rightful owner? She claimed that she didn't mean to harm me, but I didn't see her point, so she had to go to court. I stated that I was okay with it and that the court should determine who owned it. In honor of the week of Thanksgiving, my kids were distressed and really missed their mom. I received a call from my mother-in-law inviting me to join the kids for Thanksgiving dinner. Although I didn't want to meet them, I also didn't want to ruin my kids' joy. They had a close relationship with their uncle and grandmother, my brother-in-law. The invitation made them very delighted. I informed my mother-in-law that I would be dropping the kids off at her house in the morning and picking them up the following day, since I had office obligations to attend to. However, she urged that I go to dinner with them even if it was only for a few hours. "All right, I'll see," I said. After dropping the kids off at her place in the morning, I went to the office to finish off some unfinished business. Although I didn't intend to join them for dinner, I gave in to my children's demands and spent a few hours there for them. I had kept my children in the dark about our continuing legal dispute. This is too little for them to comprehend. They are just 9 and 11. I don't want to control them and instill a hatred for their aunts, uncle, and grandmother. The evening went smoothly. Because my kids were there, we only discussed general topics and not the case. My brother-in-law took them to an ice cream shop after the meal. My mother-in-law insisted on speaking with me about something just before I left. I stated that I wasn't in the mood to talk about it if it had to do with the case. Let the court make the final decision. "I trust you," she continued, holding my hands and claiming to have always treated me like her own son. However, you can never predict who you would date or marry. If she removed my daughter's possessions, the family would no longer have it. I'm only safeguarding her memories. I assured her that I would never allow her daughter's memory to be taken away from the family, and that I had always shown her the same respect and affection. The discourse came to a standstill. "We'll talk about this later," I said. She maintained that she had no ill will against them. I departed after declaring that I had none. I went to pick up my kids the next day. I stayed outside. That talk was the last thing I wanted to have. I have faith that my attorney and the legal system will protect the interests of my kids. After all, they are over and will update. The second update, my in-laws' situation has gotten rather unpleasant. I had nearly given up on winning the unpleasant legal battle when I received something from my wife's bank locker. My wife's bank notified me that the locker charge was due nearly 3 months after her death. Her savings account used to be automatically deducted for it. However, I canceled those accounts when she passed away. I was completely unaware of the locker. I gained access to it when I went to the bank. My wife had left her will in the locker. She had scrawled it and kept it securely in the locker, but it was not a legal document. I initially believed it to be a letter, but the document was identified as will paper in the locker record. Other official documents were there, although none of them were very important. My lawyer was thrilled when I showed him the will. "This paper has made our case very strong," he added. In the bank vault, my wife had named that paper as her will. She had made it very plain that my son would receive the trust fund and that all of her jewelry would be given to our daughter, with the exception of the sapphire ring, which would belong to my son's bride. There was absolutely no misunderstanding. I kept the locker incident a secret from everyone, even my in-laws. The day my lawyer submitted my wife's will at the court hearing, my in-laws had a flush. We had enough proof of the bank locker to show that it was authentic, despite their claims that it was a forged document. My in-laws were requested to return the things they had taken from my residence after the court ruled in our favor. This smoothness wasn't there. The court's decision was the result of several further hearings. The goods were given back to me in accordance with the court's decision. I kept the will a secret from my mother-in-law, which infuriated her. "I was not supposed to disclose that," I said. "It wasn't a personal matter. All I wanted was to ensure the future of my kids who deserved my wife's possessions." She ceased communicating with me. I thought she might give us a call on New Year's or Christmas Eve, but she didn't. My kids were disappointed that their grandmother hadn't invited us since they wanted to meet her. Since my parents passed away when I was a little child, my mother-in-law is the only grandmother my kids have. I don't want to keep them apart from her since they adore her. She could be busy, I informed them. The three of us enjoy the celebrations after I took them out for a lunch. My mother-in-law's activities are unknown to me. She also needs time to heal from the loss of her kid, in my opinion. In the long term, I hope things improve. Guys, update 3. Nothing is improving. The situation continues to deteriorate. My mother-in-law filed out another letter requesting custody of my children just 1 month after the court's decision. Is this unbelievable? She desired custody of my kids. For what reason? I wasn't taking excellent care of them, she said. Neglecting them, not spending enough time with them, leaving them alone at home, and so on. My mother-in-law phoned me after I received the documents. Her call really irritated me so much. To hear what she had to say, I answered the phone. She delivered her signature line. "Please don't mean anything bad to us. The only reason we are taking this action is to protect the interests of our grandkids. They require attention because they are in their formative years. They cannot spend so many hours alone themselves in the house. They can offer to look after my kids without custody if their intentions are sincere," I added. She had just ifs and buts and no solution. I told them that I was done with them and that our lawyer would now be involved in any discussions we had. She began to cry because she felt I was treating her badly. I claimed that after what she had said to me, I was acting appropriately. I hung up the phone even though she was saying something. I hurried up to my attorney. He said that their heirloom and the trust fund funds were the main causes. This was not done with any good motives. He requested that I refrain from speaking with them separately. He should be the conduit for the entire discourse. I won't go into the specifics of the court battle I fought to keep custody of my kids, but I won the case after more than 4 months. It was really exhausting. My children's statement had to be recorded to demonstrate that I was not careless, so I had to inform them about the custody dispute. I had to keep them private. Their grandmother's desire to keep them apart from their father has left them perplexed and incensed. I haven't explained to them why they would despise her. I just informed them that I was not providing them with adequate care and that their grandmother was accusing me of being a horrible father. That was the official assertion. They testified that I was doing my best as a single parent and provided the statement refuting her allegations. Indeed. Additionally, something noteworthy occurred during this period. I believe I overlooked the fact that following the death of my father-in-law 4 years ago, I was taking care of my mother-in-law's home expenses. Indeed, throughout the months when my father-in-law was alive, I was covering her expenses while she was occupied with scheming against me through legal actions. He had a pension in the past. He worked for the government. However, the annuity ceased after his death. Other than the mansion, he was not very wealthy. Therefore, my wife assumed responsibility for my mother's care. Although they didn't volunteer, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are also present. After my wife passed away, I kept my word and kept up with my mother-in-law's household expenses. I stopped being a saint and stopped paying her the monthly payments when she hauled me to court a second time, this time for custody of my kids. Stepping on a tiger's tail was the equivalent of that. Searching for me, she came down. That was never appreciated by her. Even though her daughter was gone, I assumed her responsibilities. She was enraged, though, when I halted it. She referred to me as cruel. She pointed out that I had all of my wife's valuables and her trust fund. Therefore, I was in charge of looking after her. Really? Are any of you able to understand this? I said that I had had enough of giving out free things and receiving nothing in return. She promised to ruin me and take away my children. She believed she would be granted custody of my children. However, I would still provide her home expenses and child support. Simply amazing. I informed her that although she was free to do as she pleased, I would not allow her to have my children. My children and I were so relieved when I ultimately prevailed in the custody dispute. In fact, my kids saw the devastation I had experienced. They informed me that they made the decision to stop living with their grandmother. She had caused this herself, but I never wanted it to happen. Although she had a different viewpoint than ours, I attempted to dissuade them from this and help them see that grandmother is not bad. This was not bought by them. They really said, "Dad, you're just too naive." Life has been really hectic lately, particularly in terms of work. After the catastrophe struck, I found it difficult to focus on my work. This was something my business partner had been managing alone. I'm attempting to make up for my absence now that everything has been resolved. My kids are now more mature and responsible. They are so capable of caring for themselves. I quote, "Am really proud of them. They prepare dinner for me on the days when I arrive home late. I am really appreciative and happy for them. They were reared perfectly by my wife." A few days ago, the person who started this topic came up at my door. I had all but forgotten about it during that time. Yes, the mother-in-law unexpectedly appeared. I called her inside after greeting her. My children had gone to their room. In addition to asking them to be kind to their grandmother, I went upstairs to call them. She began to cry as she gave them hugs. "I apologize for everything," she said. In front of the kids, I said nothing to her. After returning to their room, my mother-in-law apologized to me. She had truly hurt me, I told her. When I most needed her, she turned against me. Having always respected her, I challenged her. Even after being aware of her actual motivations for the 2 lawsuits, she wanted my wife's fortune. The legal lawsuit was motivated by greed rather than concern. She recognized it in a way. She sobbed aloud while holding my hand. "I am too upset about losing my daughter," she remarked. And in that case, she followed her older daughter's instructions. Therefore, my sister-in-law had been encouraging my mother-in-law to file a lawsuit against me in order to seize my wife's belongings. Why was she telling me all of this now? I asked. She said that she now comprehended everyone and everything. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law urged her to pursue the legal battle with me when I stopped paying her expenses, promising to look after her. However, they turned their backs on her and left her after she lost. They made fun of her and told her to beg me for aid when she begged for it. The fact that my wife received her grandmother's family heritage jewels and her uncle's trust fund made them envious. My wife earned them, so she received them. She was a kind lady. She took care of her uncle. She took care of her sick granny. She then became the owner of their belongings. It seemed odd that they never expressed their disapproval in front of my wife. On our faces, they were all really affectionate and considerate. When my mother-in-law told me the truth, I was taken aback. I also failed to see through their motive, she claimed. Their true goal was to obtain the jewels and trust fund from me so they could later split it among themselves. She apologized repeatedly. I informed her that we should put the painful past behind us and that I had forgiven her. She requested financial assistance. I informed her that, unlike before, I could only assist her and not bear all of her responsibilities. She was angry. I said that I needed to raise my 2 kids for college and beyond. I also needed to ensure my retirement. There was no one to help me, just in case my business didn't work out. When my wife was present, money was never a concern for me, despite the fact that her pay paled in comparison to what I made. She was my backbone, though. I have none now. I understand, she responded. She begged me not to take my kids away from her. I vowed never to do that. But the kids had seen the custody battle up close and didn't like that their grandmother wanted to take them away from their father. However, I reassured her that my kids are grown up and will ultimately love her again and forgive her. All they need is a lot of love and more time. She concurred. I invited her to join us for supper. It was nice to have her back in my life, and we ate supper together with the kids. I discussed it with my attorney. Regarding the money issue, he advised me to exercise caution. She was unable to receive any money from the 2 court cases, so he cautioned that it may be a made-up narrative to extract money from me. She may be trying to gain it by playing on her feelings. I'm cautious around her now and don't just take money out of my pockets. These days, raising my kids and providing for their future are my top priorities. I wish for them to achieve professional success. My spouse desired that they obtain a professional degree and be well educated. I'm eager to do all in my power to help them. I don't think I'm ready yet, but my buddies urged me to start dating women. Just because I have someone in my life doesn't mean I want to get involved. A's previously said, my profession and my children's future are currently my top priorities. I appreciate all of your kindness and help. I adore you all. Story 3. I sold the house in secret and took my ex-wife and mother-in-law to the streets when they evicted me without realizing I was the owner. Let me start by acknowledging that I could be the villain for having this perspective. What you guys would have done is unclear. Listen to me. My mother-in-law is my issue. She is too inquisitive. She must be involved in all of our decisions. I'm annoyed by her interference, particularly when it comes to money. I feel like I'm vying with her for my wife Mandy's support and attention these days. Before my mother-in-law joined our lives, or rather my home, I, a 41-year-old man, had been married to my wife Mandy for 7 years. Our marriage had no warning signs. We were generally pleased and delighted with our life. After my mother-in-law suffered a fatal accident 2 years ago, things started to go south. She has fractures on half of her body. Her odds were bleak, yet she lived. She had trouble sitting. A regular existence looked a long way off. It was time for release after a month in the hospital. Mandy has only 1 kid. When she was a child, her father abandoned her mother. He doesn't even exist in their life. I won't get into details about him since they are irrelevant. Prior to her injury, the mother-in-law lived alone. She could not have survived on her own in this state. Mandy so urged that we bring our mother-in-law along. Yes, I do feel sorry for her. But, it's not nice to have your mother-in-law around. But because they had no other choice, I consented. Our mother-in-law couldn't be left alone. To provide a cozy environment for my mother-in-law, I made modifications to the guest bedroom. She didn't interfere with our affairs during the 1 stone year. Mostly due to the fact that she was bedridden. We allowed our normal lives to continue, except that Mandy had a full-time job and was quite busy caring for her mother. Because Mandy is constantly busy and exhausted from balancing so many obligations together, we hired a nurse for our mother-in-law while she was at work. This greatly decreased our time together for a few hours. I stood at her side till her mother's mouth was closed. To be honest, I had no desire for my mother-in-law to reside in my home. Who does? Given the circumstances, I concurred. I assumed this would be a short-term arrangement, but my mother-in-law doesn't seem to be in the mood to leave my place. She's gotten over her ailment, after all. Her broken bones returned to their positions. However, this woman has no desire to return to hers. Even though she can talk and walk a lot, she still spends her leisure time relaxing at my place. Guys, I'm not being cruel. Imagine spending 2 years with a cruel mother-in-law. Both Mandy and I work full-time jobs. Throughout the week, we seldom have time for one another. We eagerly await the weekend so we can spend quality time together. Additionally, it appears that the 2 mothers-in-law take over. She would request that Mandy take her to the hospital so she could get checked out, or a salon perhaps, or to go shopping. She always has something planned for Mandy on the weekends. Despite being able to drive, the mother-in-law does not. She claims that the collision has made her afraid to drive. All right, is she able to use an Uber? No, she wants Mandy to get away with it. After I objected, Mandy came up with a solution, and I agreed to follow it. Really? Is that indeed the answer? Between the mother and daughter, I feel like I'm taking the lead. This is only the beginning. It quote s, not just that. Mother-in-law started sniffing at everything as soon as she started to feel better. She made remarks on the house's aesthetics and even the buildings, pointing out that some of them were poorly built. She couldn't vibe in sooner, so she even had her room repainted. Mandy used to find her mother's sarcastic comments annoying. But with time, I discovered that she was doing what her mother had instructed. She made Mandy change her clothes, repainted the space, and rearranged the furnishings. Mandy obeying her mother's commands like a puppet bothers me. I attempt to explain to her that she shouldn't comply with her mother's requests and frequently oppose her behavior. She looked persuaded at my face. Later on, though I observe her carrying out her mother's instructions, she would just respond, "Oh, I changed my mind," when confronted. Or I understood that Mom was correct, so I took this action. I've been harboring these little episodes, and last month I lost it on Mandy. I made a note of every occurrence that was upsetting me. She broke down in tears and admitted to being manipulated by her mother. Mandy says her mother-in-law has been manipulating her by saying things like, "Mandy, how lonely your life would have been today if I had died in the accident. What would happen if I died in another accident? Wouldn't you regret not paying attention to me? What a piece of shit." My mother-in-law. Her mother is really toxic if this is accurate. Additionally, Mandy is rather gullible to allow herself to be manipulated. When will my mother-in-law be returning to her home? I ask Mandy. I asked a question that astonished her. What went wrong with it is beyond me. She lost it. She said she was unable to comprehend why I was expecting her mother to live alone, following such a terrifying catastrophe. I attempted to clarify that she should ultimately move out even though I didn't want to kick her out. I even proposed that our mother-in-law relocate closer to our home so that we can easily go to her in an emergency because she has recovered to her previous level of health and is able to live independently. However, Mandy persisted in her argument that following such a horrific catastrophe, how could I ask her mother to leave? Your mother had an accident and is now well, I blurted out when I could take it no longer. Her illness is not terminal, that you are unable to leave her. Mandy stated I was wishing her mother a fatal disease as she gazed at me with crimson blood in her eyes. She quote is still upset with me after this incident, which occurred around 2 weeks ago. This time I haven't apologized either. I don't believe I stated anything incorrectly. We don't communicate well. Even though we share a bed, we pretend the other one doesn't exist and face the walls. The house is becoming a really hazardous place to live. I want to flee. She spends much of her time with her mother-in-law or in her room. This isn't my fault at all, in my opinion. However, I am aware that I ought to have handled this more skillfully. Although I wish my mother-in-law the best, I most definitely do not want her living with us. How can I approach this issue? Update 1. Over the past few months, a problem has gradually come to light. For the purpose of relevancy, I'll summarize everything by picking up where I left off a few days after my post. As we slept, Mandy gave me a hug. She told me she was sorry for exaggerating things, saying it was stupid of her. I put the conversation on hold for later because I wanted to see how she felt about moving her mother-in-law to her home. I didn't want to ruin the moment. She asked me out on a date. Her efforts to improve the connection pleased me. I was mistaken, boy. It was a trap. She revealed that her mother had sold off her house during a romantic dinner date. She would now be residing with us on a permanent basis. I lost it. People were staring at us, so she whispered to me to relax. I felt confined. How could I have any composure? How, after all, could she have made this decision without my input? This was more of a for your information than a request or demand. She simply delivered the bombshell and assumed I would accept it. I hurried away since I didn't want to complete the supper. She insisted that we speak as she accompanied me to the car. I didn't pay attention. She shouted that because her mother would be home, she had organized the supper so that we could talk about this issue outside. She didn't want her mother to see us like this, and knew I would panic out. I let out a yell. "That's right, that's what I'm saying. If she moves in with us, this is what will occur. We're unable to have privacy. For the rest of our lives, do you want us to spend every evening outside, so the home cannot be ours alone? We'll have our own room for private time," she whispered. At that point, I questioned her about why she hadn't told me this in person. She said that her mother would feel awful if I screamed. I had the impression that I was speaking to a wall. I wanted space, so I asked her to go home alone. I stormed out of the car, called a cab, and proceeded to a nearby pub since she wouldn't get out. I got drunk, contacted my coworker, and vented about my awful existence. Mandy was sitting in her mother-in-law's room with her when I got home. I went to bed and fell asleep. My coworker recommended that I speak with Mandy in a reasonable manner. I gave it a chance even though I didn't want to. I questioned her about their future plans and the reasons for her mother-in-law's sale of the house. She first began to cry. "You were really rude to me last night. Everyone was staring at me when you bounded out of the restaurant, which was rather awkward. After that, I had to drive home by myself and tell my mother everything. I questioned why she felt compelled to tell her mother everything. 'Are you insane?' she said. Mom noticed that we were going on a date, and I came home crying by myself. Do you not believe that someone would inquire as to why I declined? Nobody would inquire if you drew the line. In any case, let's get to the reason behind your mother selling the property." After 10 minutes of discussion, she came to the conclusion that her mother-in-law had sold the house to pay for her medical expenses, leaving her with nowhere to go. Therefore, we ought to make room for her in our position. I had no idea what to do. Anger-fueled yelling was not going to help. Mother-in-law had nowhere to go, that much was true. Furthermore, I can't just abandon her on the streets. Yes, they made a horrible mistake by imposing their decisions on me without consulting me first. But now, what were my options? I so allowed my mother-in-law to reside in my home. However, I instructed Mandy to consider this a stopgap measure until we find a location for her. I also established some ground rules, such as not letting our mother-in-law meddle in our affairs or engage her in household decision-making. Mandy gave a nod. For a month, everything was going well. But then our mother-in-law started meddling in our affairs once more. She would make remarks about our lifestyle, eating habits, and even my spending patterns. She said that I was like Mandy's father, who every Friday sent flowers for her mother-in-law. "I don't spend enough on Mandy," she admits. Even though I acknowledge that I'm not the best at expressing my emotions, I still adore my wife. However, we ended up arguing because Mandy was influenced by her mother. These days, putting up with the mother-in-law is getting really tough. Asking her to go is the only option I can think of. I have no idea. In my case, what would you guys have done? The second update. I apologize. Pending court proceedings prevented me from updating earlier. Update it now that it's all over, so that everyone who has been requesting one may get closure. This update will be lengthy. Get your coffee. My mother-in-law kept ruining my life. I ended the date because she was starting to irritate me. Last month was the 9th anniversary. I wanted Mandy to wear the lovely outfit I purchased her for the surprise supper. When my mother-in-law saw the gift, she called me a tightwad for receiving a typical anniversary present. I ignored her and went to my room since I didn't want to ruin our evening. I had a surprise planned for Mandy, so I urged her to get ready, but she was pouting in the corner about the present. I reassured her that rather than giving her a meaningless present, I had prepared a lovely evening for her. Despite my best efforts, Mandy remained still. I didn't take her on vacation and she was upset with me for it. I should have at least gotten her a diamond, she urged. The eatery was calling me non-stop in the meanwhile. The rooftop arena, which I had reserved, was decked out with candles and flowers. Everything was damaged by her. My trash was lost. She was unappreciative of my efforts and insisted on receiving a costly present. I advised her to inform me beforehand if she needed diamonds for her anniversary. Instead of spending so much money creating a romantic entryway, I might have purchased anything. She can't count on me to read her thoughts. I didn't know a materialistic Mandy. Her mother must have instilled the virus in her. Mandy was still not ready to leave. so I had to cancel the reservation, even though the restaurant manager made a last decision before they threw out the decorations. According to their policy, I did not receive a refund. I went crazy and screamed at Mandy for being duped by her mother. Yes, I did call her Piggy when I was furious. She also used disparaging names to describe me. Her mistakes, however, are not her own. Our argument became so heated that I was at my breaking point. I rushed out of the house and went to my friend's place to spend the night. When I returned home the following afternoon, I received the shock of my life. With my keys, I was unable to open the door. The lock on my house was changed. My mother-in-law was shouting out of the window, "How dare you call my daughter Piggy?" as I slammed the door in frustration. "You're a scumbag. Not even flowers may be purchased for my doll. Until you apologize and give her what she deserves, you are not permitted to be in this house any longer. Jewelry set with diamonds." Her demand startled me. It was like paying a ransom to get my house back. "I'm sorry, please diamond my butt." "Where's Mandy?" I asked. According to her mother-in-law, she was at work. I questioned her if she was aware of this when driving to her place of employment. She was, in fact, working hand in hand with her mother on this. She said that up until now I had been foolish for not expecting anything from you. "I'm glad my mother entered my life and taught me how to handle difficult situations. I like you, Penny. To enter the home now, you must fetch me a diamond jewelry. You live on the streets till then." I walked out after giving her the finger. I contacted my father and told him everything. In order to find a solution, he urged me to come home. I wasn't prepared to concede. I had had enough of Mandy. She would need to follow her outside the house if she wanted to follow her mother. Dad looked for a lawyer in the meanwhile. What did I want? He asked. Divorce, I added. He claimed that because my witch mother-in-law would try to take advantage of me at every turn, he would begin the paperwork and urge me to consider the conditions of the divorce. Mandy texted me the next day to let me know that my belongings were packed and stored on the front porch. It seems that there was not enough room in her home for my garbage. Tears filled my eyes as I gathered my belongings and walked out. I vowed to exact revenge for my humiliation. I wanted to take the roof over their head, so I urged my lawyer to put the divorce procedures on wait for a little. I listed my house for sale in secret. I've lived in that residence for almost 10 years. I have enough photos of it so that any buyer could decide. But it was the finest offer since my lawyer knew someone who was looking for a house. I was very honest with the customer about my present circumstances. He recognized me. His house was taken from him by his adulterous wife during a recent divorce. Thus, everything came full circle. I gave him a break on the going rate. The fear on the face of my soon-to-be ex-wife and mother-in-law was worth the loss of a few $1,000s. I transferred the proceeds from the sale of my home to my father's bank account. I thus had no assets at the time of my divorce. I accompanied my lawyer to the new owner after all the paperwork was completed. Sunday was the day. Former spouse and mother-in-law, they were both at home. I slammed the doorbell down. The mother-in-law opens the door and peeks through the window. Over her voice, she swore. She believed that my buddies and I had come to cause trouble. Yes, I did say trouble, but not the type you were imagining. The sheriff arrived late. A few minutes. My attorney gave his name. Mandy said, "Who were they?" as she hurried out her room. I presented the house's new owner to them. Their faces became white. They needed many minutes to grasp the situation. "I can't sell the house without Mandy's approval," my mother-in-law shouted. "Looks like I can and have the house," I remarked. "Since it's my residence, it solely had my name. I purchased it prior to marriage, therefore Mandy has no claim to it." It was rather gratifying to watch them rushing around and babbling in a panic, phoning friends and family to ask whether this was okay. The sheriff showed up in the interim and delivered the most devastating surprise. Mandy was served. She had been broken. She sagged down on the sofa. She began to cry while holding my hands. I dismissed her. When her mother attempted to embrace her, Mandy shoved her away and said that she was solely to blame. The mother-in-law was stunned and mortified. I granted Mandy's request for a private chat. She begged me not to get a divorce. She said she didn't deserve this treatment and that she had never cheated on me. I reiterated her claim that neither of us had ever cheated on her, loved her, looked after her, and even brought her mother to live with me. She did something to me that I didn't deserve either. Therefore, we would be on equal footing after this divorce. She sobbed that if I expelled them, they would have nowhere to go. When she and her mother locked me out of the home, I asked her whether she was concerned about my whereabouts. No. Correct. I do, however, care about them. I gave them 15 days' notice to leave the residence because of this. I was under no legal need to notify them. None of the house's legal records contain their names. I paid the property taxes. I own the house, therefore I could just declare them squatters and evict them while I was shut out. However, I desired a chilly retaliation. Even after giving 15 days' notice, they were still not prepared to leave the residence. They didn't pack up and leave until the new owner phoned the police. Since I sold the house along with the furniture and other items, he made sure they simply packed their clothing and possessions and didn't take anything else. I purchased everything after having to leave the house. They occupied a hotel room. None of her relatives were friendly with her ex-mother-in-law. To request a favor from them. After learning about this circumstance, who would invite them into their home? Unfortunately, I had no assets, but Mandy sought 50% of them throughout the divorce process. According to my lawyer, my dad gave me the house as a gift, and I returned the money to him once I sold it. There is no claim there. Since she works, the monthly maintenance was disregarded due to the smaller pay gap between us. Therefore, she gains very little from this divorce, in complete contrast to her mother's intentions. For the first several weeks, Mandy bombarded my phone with apologies and entreaties. She pleaded for a second chance and vowed to break off all contact with her mom. It's too late. Mandy, now the ship has set sail. I am aware that some of you may argue that I acted rashly. Believe me, I've never made a more deliberate choice than this one. Mandy was slowly becoming more like her mother, and my ex-mother-in-law had made my life miserable. It was impossible to get rid of the ex-mother-in-law without losing Mandy. Why would I want her anyway? She was deceived by her mother, tortured and degraded me, and expelled me from my own home. I no longer respected or loved her. What use does it then make to stay in the marriage? I'm not sure what the future holds for me, but I can't allow somebody to take advantage of me for the sake of marriage or love. I quote Mem, resentful of the circumstance. I'm hoping to get over it quickly and start over. That's all for now, but I'll keep you informed. I appreciate you reading.
It's time to raise a chair. In our lounge section of the world, where guest lists are more meticulously planned than the Netflix series lineup and seating maps turn into battlefields, we have another fantastic story for you today. We have our Bridgerton in our lounge today. Amanda is here in town. Is it wrong of me to invite my brother's girlfriend and take away his +1? I need to know how awful it was, but I think I have the angle. Leah and my 29-year-old brother have been together for almost 2 years. We all like her. She is very kind. I sent an invitation to my brother's residence because I'm getting married in April. We made the decision to invite households rather than individuals. For instance, our aunt's family sent her an invitation rather than one for each person. We gathered at my folks' house last Thursday. Due to certain tax considerations, it was only the core family. I inquired about my brother's dietary needs when we were there. I am aware that she cannot eat some fresh veggies and is a vegetarian for health reasons. He announced that he would be bringing his lady best friend Amanda in her place as she would not be attending. Their connection is strange as hell right now. My brother has always been duped by Amanda. I think he constantly says he doesn't feel anything for her. Let's be honest, though. Amanda would blow off my brother and date other men. She would then become reattached to him when their relationships were failing. Around the time my brother was born, she ended her relationship with her previous partner. Amanda, his ex-girlfriend at the time, was scheduled to go to Spain with him. What was done by my foolish brother? Take Amanda by herself? Because his ex-girlfriend made Amanda uncomfortable. He was obviously caught off guard when his girlfriend ended their relationship. I stopped talking altogether. Because it's strange, too. I then inquired as to whether they had other intentions when he said that. However, according to my brother, Amanda had requested if she might go, as it would be a chance to finally meet the old group. In high school, we had a buddy group. If I wanted Amanda there, I would have invited her. I informed him Amanda is cold and cruel. At every gathering, she constantly criticizes other girls. After approximately an hour, she will either start weeping, go away, or sit at a table and beg everyone to leave her alone, followed by a mysterious remark about something hurting her. I informed my brother that Amanda would not be attending our wedding and that I was canceling his +1. I don't understand opposite-sex friendships, therefore he accused me of being racist and sexist. My husband's best lady is a female acquaintance from his early years. She has been incredible, respects limits, and I adore her too. She always includes me, and worked really hard to have me accepted into the circle of friends when I first started dating my fiancé. In any case, I declared my choice to be definitive. I like Leah, therefore I would be inviting her myself, but you can accept or reject. He yelled at me, telling me to stay out of his affairs. I told him to stop having strange feelings for Amanda. He is upset with me. It's none of our business, according to my dad. My brother has angered my mother. Am I the jerk then? Edit to address a few queries. The Smiths were the recipients of the invitation. Surprisingly, Leah and I shared the same last name. We do have one of the most popular last names, to be sure. Indeed, they share a residence. The tax issue is not really significant. Despite running a tiny business, my parents struggle to keep track of all their receipts. We thus go and assist them once a month. For the accountant, we scan the receipts and enter them into an accounting program. The comments contain Amanda's name. Say hello. The purported remarks of Amanda. Before leaving a remark on the original poster's post, the editor noticed that the account was responding and had a well-established account on my car. It was neither a novel account nor a disposable one. This individual should not be harassed or DM'd. This is against the sub's regulations. This is only included since it is pertinent to Opie's writing and observations. You're the asshole, the person says. He just won't attend your wedding if he's sensible. That's the proper approach to deal with jerks like you. And he'll go if he's sensible. No communication with you. A hole. Nope, he said. I wouldn't mind, yes. Well, if you don't mind, it's okay if your dad and brother don't attend your wedding, the individual responds. It would have been okay to not invite your brother, but the way you handled it makes you shout, sending him an invitation, attempting to control him and make decisions about his connection, and then removing his companion because you wish to choose his partner. That's going too far, the Opie responds. Dude, my dad isn't upset with me. He believes the drama is needless. He is simply avoiding men since he doesn't like them either. Amanda responded to a number of other comments, some of which are included below. It's not the a-hole, the commentator says, but your brother is. He has to be given a serious reality check. Amanda seems like a really poisonous and troublesome girl, and since it's your wedding, you have every right to choose who gets to go and who doesn't, quote, before Amanda can further ruin his life. I hope your brother can see how manipulative she is and cut her off. That's none of Opie's business, Amanda responds. She rescinded it and gave him a +1. She is a jerk for getting involved with him. Her family will be split apart as a result. We'll see whether her father and brother are the only ones who won't be attending. You can invite Leah yourself, according to another commentator, but based on your brother's actions, it's doubtful that they will still be together by then, even if they are. If he continues to put Amanda before her, I wouldn't expect her to stay. I really like Leah as a friend, and I would like to have her there, the Opie responds. To be honest, I ought to have just sent a formal invitation to her. To be honest, I should have been able to predict that David would do this. How does the commenter feel about Amanda? Well, she feels hyper-insecure about Amanda, the Opie responds. She should, according to a commentator, as this conduct is rather evident, an indication that he will cheat in a heartbeat if Amanda gives him the chance, and he has most likely already done so with his ex. The Opie responds, I completely agree. He would drive pantless to Amanda's house if she wrote him immediately to let him know she wanted him. I've stopped communicating with his sibling years ago, as far as I know. Even though I still communicate with his ex, I always feel bad for the wonderful females he brings home. My career was aided by her. One commentator claims that even if she isn't with your brother anymore at the time of the wedding, he will end there alone, but just to be safe till he or she is invited, because, let's face it, it will only be a matter of time till she learns that she is capable of much more and dumps him. Give Leah a +1 so she can have fun. She would feel really welcome that way. I don't blame you in the slightest for not having your brother's side piece at your wedding. He is a huge jerk. If you didn't want him at your wedding, I wouldn't blame you either. She can do so much better on paper, the OP responds. My brother is a really wonderful person. Fantastic work. Sound financially. He takes pride in his appearance and volunteers at animal shelters, and he's normally really kind and affectionate when he's not swooning over Amanda. But why don't he and Amanda hang out together, bro? I don't know, guy. It's so strange. When someone spends time with him, she feels envious. I previously advised him to ask her to have an open, one-sided relationship in which he waits for her at home because he already does that, and she is free to do as she pleases. Did he even let Leah know she was invited? Asks one commenter. It is possible that he is lying and that the girlfriend was unaware of the wedding. The OP responds that she actually didn't know. The commenter responds, how did she find out? From him or from you? To prevent damage? The OP answered. I asked her about it over the phone in front of him. She didn't know. The a-hole did not vote. The AP did. It appears that your wedding invitation list has just become a war, removing invites to parties and excluding disruptive people. You seem to be organizing more than simply a wedding. We are preparing a military operation. Who is the casualty, you ask? Your brother's common sense, that's all. To be honest, though, I don't believe you're at fault here, OP. Really, comma. Why would anyone want to be near a wedding with Amanda's attitude like a walking thundercloud? It would be like throwing a tea party for a storm. Undoubtedly, it will leave a trail of devastation and a fractured china in its wake. Bingo if weddings made a poor choice. Your brother would be extremely successful. The wedding ambiance will be more in line with Amanda and her cyclone of drama if Leah is not invited. That is a surefire way to fail. I do it faster than you can say. 2 weeks later, on my daily commute, I listened to 2 hot takes. Therefore, your response to my post came as a major surprise. I appreciate your insights. Note from the editor, this YouTube video segment is from TikTok, about the invitation. I now understand that I should have avoided using the phrase, inviting a single person. Unless there is demand for visitors, I thought it would be fun to invite the household. I learnt my lesson. I would want to share an update with you. For around 2 days following the altercation, I didn't hear from either Leah or my brother. Amanda contacted me at that time, furious over what I had said on Reddit. She claimed that there are other special women in my brother's life than Leah and labeled me a jerk. She maintained that she existed before Leah or any of his partners and would outlive them all, arguing that neither Leah nor I had the right to be greedy with my brother's time. She concluded by implying that she will undoubtedly attend my wedding. I was furious. Instead of responding to her other comments, I wrote her a direct message. Hi, Amanda. My wedding is not open to you. Set up a coffee date if you'd want to visit the old group. While everyone is in the city, do you want to attend the wedding? Staff or the cops will accompany you out in a calm manner. Please don't get in touch with my hubby or me. In response, Amanda sent me further emails that largely contained ambiguous threats and derogatory names. She also used Instagram to subtly attack me. In order for people to see my alerts but not realize I was tagged, she tied me to posts and made my username Tiny. I believe she asked herself leading questions when she utilized the Ask Me Anything sticker on her Instagram story. Among the highlights were inquiries on the ideal wedding attire. With this description for a picture of her wearing a dress, but regrettably, I'll never be able to use it. What irritates you the most? A tirade about inquisitive individuals who believe they have the right to manipulate others follows. She included a lot of depressing phrases about not having a female in her tale. She told me all of them. Naturally, I took screenshots of each one. When Amanda began circulating a different tale, other friends contacted me to say that I had invited her at first, but had subsequently withdrawn the invitation because Leah despises her and had persuaded my brother to do the same. What? Quote, cool. One individual now believes her. The few men who still communicate with Amanda are more associated with my brother, and many of her former high school pals have severed their relationships with her. They contacted me to inform me that Amanda was circulating false information. After she complained to them, the females in the group blocked her, which then caused them to start hammering their phones. My brother became alarmed, believing that I had launched an offensive on her. In relation to my brother, he repeatedly texted and called me. I'm upset that I left Amanda out and even held her accountable for any injuries she may sustain. I also called her mother and told her that Amanda was despondent and that she would never forgive me if something happened to her. If he was truly worried, my mother suggested that he call for a welfare check since, as an untrained individual, he wouldn't be prepared to deal with such circumstances. My brother's expulsion from a shared flat is the most significant development. They contacted to let me know that she might not feel comfortable attending the wedding and that the relationship might not last. I listened to her and understood her choice. She described their unpleasant altercation without getting into all the specifics when we met for coffee. They showed no restraint. She sent a copy to one of her male pals who said, "Leo, what the F?" after forcing my brother to read aloud every single text exchange between him and Amanda. This is unacceptable. She cited this as proof that their exchanges were, at best, improper and, more accurately, emotional. She questioned my brother, "Why do you always pick Amanda now?" as he pleaded with her to stay. He promised not to. However, his prompt response to Amanda's historic call regarding my mistreatment of her demonstrated otherwise. While he consoled Amanda in a separate room, Leah departed. Later, when she was away, she contacted him to tell him to get out. She didn't want to see him unless specific requirements were fulfilled because it's her residence. Removing Amanda entirely and going to treatment to deal with his bad habits. The battle lasted for 2 hard days. In the comments section of her podcast, Leah found comfort. "It was beneficial but weird," she said. She wishes others in similar circumstances to know a few things and sends her regards. Being with someone who isn't good for you will make you feel more alone than being alone, so don't be afraid of being alone. Avoid becoming involved with her at all costs. Her mindset generally ends in heartbreak, but I can change it. Put yourself first, and it's admirable to strive to resolve the issue. Don't rely on it to solve the problem. That's essentially it. My daily existence is really peaceful, despite the fact that it seems complicated, like a soap opera. My brother needs to grow up and either commit to Amanda or acknowledge that he's being taken advantage of, in my opinion. And to Amanda, please mature and stop bothering me. Before we wrap up for the day, one pertinent remark. Is your father still attending your wedding then? Bro, I'm so happy they broke up with her. They hope, he says. Indeed, without a doubt. They're also taking a break. Kindly add the meme from Roth's collection here. Like a subtle stab in a crowded room, I tag you in postings. A classic move. And those stories that ask me anything. Her theatrical speeches and passive-aggressive wardrobe choices are reminiscent of hosting a solo edition of The Amanda Show. Perhaps daytime television drama was her actual calling. Not to mention the part your brother plays. He is enmeshed in a more tangled and less Twilight love triangle. The receipts are physically in Leah's possession. Emotional matters discussed over coffee, texts read aloud. Can coffee be enjoyed in any other way? So let's hope that your wedding day is the last day of your life and that you have a happier, more fulfilling life. How do you interpret this? We also appreciate your presence at the Our Lounge today. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. I'll see you shortly, and return your chair to its original location.